the rise of the gods. The galaxy had long been ruled by a race of beings so powerful, so advanced, that they were considered gods. The Elythians, with their vast fleets and unimaginable technology, controlled the stars with an iron fist. They had wiped out countless civilizations, leaving no room for rebellion. To the other races, the Elythians were not just rulers, they were divine, untouchable, and infallible. For centuries, the Elythians had held dominion over the galaxy. They were feared by all, their power unmatched. Their ships, sleek and indestructible, floated like gods among the stars, and their presence alone could silence the bravest of warriors. No force had dared challenge them, not for 1,000 years. The gods had declared themselves the rulers of the universe, and no one had the strength to disagree. It was a time of peace, but a peace built on terror. The Elythians were not kind rulers. They crushed anyone who dared to oppose them, whether it be a rebellion on a distant planet or a small resistance movement. They made sure the entire galaxy knew their power, and those who didn't bow were swiftly erased. They kept their hold by spreading a simple message: resist us, and you will be destroyed. But, deep in the cold reaches of space, humanity had begun to rise. For years, Earth had been quiet, hidden away from the galactic wars that raged beyond its borders. The humans had been a small, insignificant species until now. Their recent advancements had caught the attention of the elite. The humans had made great strides in their technology, and for the first time, the gods were beginning to notice their power. Captain Ethan Reed stood at the helm of the Pioneer, humanity's most advanced warship. It was a small ship compared to the gargantuan vessels of the Elythians, but it carried with it something far greater than just firepower. It carried the hope of a species that had spent centuries in the shadows, waiting for its time to step forward. Ethan stared out into the endless black of space, his thoughts focused. Earth had always been considered weak by the rest of the galaxy. A planet full of ambition and potential, yes, but a planet that had yet to prove its strength, that was about to change. The Pioneer was not just any ship, was the culmination of humanity's best minds, designed to challenge the gods themselves. Its weapons were cutting-edge, its shields impenetrable, and its crew trained for the impossible. Ethan knew that the Elythians would not take kindly to this challenge, but he was prepared. The ship was ready, and more importantly, the crew was ready. Captain, we've reached the edge of Elythian space, said Sarah Cole, the ship's communications officer. Her voice was steady, but there was a noticeable tension in her tone. She knew what this moment meant. Ethan turned to face her, a determined look in his eyes. Activate the stealth systems. Let's make sure we're not detected. The last thing we want is a direct confrontation right now. Understood, Sarah replied, her fingers flying over the controls. The lights on the ship dimmed as the Pioneer engaged its advanced stealth systems, blending into the void of space. Ethan could feel the ship moving smoothly, silently, as if it were a ghost. They were about to enter territory where no human ship had dared go before. The crew was on high alert. This mission was risky. No one had ever attempted to challenge the Elythi. To enter their space was a bold declaration, a challenge to their authority. And the consequences of failure would be disastrous. But Ethan knew something the Elythians didn't. Humanity was not weak. They had their own fire, their own ambition, and they were ready to take on the universe. As they moved deeper into Elythian space, the ship's sensors picked up signs of movement. The Elythian fleet was nearby, massive ships, their sleek forms drifting majestically in space. They were so enormous that even from a distance, their presence was overwhelming. The ships glowed with a soft, otherworldly light, the color of a dying star. "Captain, we've got an Alethian fleet dead ahead." "I'm detecting several ships, all of them heavy cruisers," Sarah reported, her voice tense. Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the readout. The Alethians were known for their arrogance, and their fleet would be a formidable challenge. But humanity had learned much in the past few years. They had prepared for this moment. "Stay focused, everyone," Ethan said, his voice steady. "We are not here to fight yet. Our mission is simple. Gather intelligence, make our presence known, and return. We're not here to start a war." But even as he said those words, he knew deep down that this was no simple mission. This was a declaration. Humanity wasn't just here to observe, they were here to show the gods that they were no longer afraid. The ship's weapon systems hummed to life, but Ethan held up a hand. "Not yet. Let's see how they react." As the Pioneer drifted through the darkness, the Alethians didn't seem to notice the human ship. Their fleet moved with the calm confidence of beings who believed they were untouchable. Their ships as much a symbol of power as a weapon of war. It was clear that the gods hadn't expected anyone to challenge their authority. But soon, that would change. Without warning, one of the Alethian ships began to alter its course. The enormous cruiser veered toward the Pioneer, its engines lighting up with a sudden, sharp burst of energy. It was no coincidence. The Alethians had detected something. "Brace yourselves," Ethan said, his grip tightening on the ship's controls. "We've been spotted." The challenge ignites the Pioneer drifted quietly through the vastness of Alethian space, its stealth systems doing their job perfectly. The crew could feel the weight of their mission pressing down on them. What had started as a seemingly small step into enemy territory was quickly escalating. The tension in the air was palpable, each crew member silently preparing for the moment when their actions would trigger the conflict they had been trained for. Ethan stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the view screen as the enormous Alethian ship continued to approach. Its size alone was enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. Even though the ship's weapons remained silent for now, the sheer presence of such a vessel felt like an impending storm. He could see the soft glow of the cruiser's engines, like distant stars slowly burning brighter as it neared them. The silence in the ship was almost suffocating. Every small sound, the whir of the engines, the hum of the life support systems, louder than usual. The crew waited in anticipation, knowing that the moment the Alethian ship closed the gap, they would be forced to act. "Captain, they're locking onto us," Sarah said, her voice tight with concern. "They know we're here now." Ethan didn't need to be told. He could feel the shift in the ship's energy, the faint hum of its systems suddenly becoming sharper, more alert. The Pioneer had been designed for stealth, but there was only so much that could be done when facing a fleet so far beyond human capabilities. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Ethan ordered. "Hold tight, everyone. This is where the real test begins." As the Pioneer began to make its move, the enemy ship responded. It was swift, its movements precise, as though it had known what to expect. The ship's weapons powered up with terrifying speed, and before anyone could react, a single energy blast shot toward them, a bright, brilliant beam of light that could easily vaporize a lesser vessel. Shields at maximum, Marco, the pilot, shouted, his hands flying over the controls. "We're taking a hit." The blast struck the Pioneer with a violent jolt, causing the entire ship to shudder under the force. The crew braced themselves, their bodies pushed back against their seats. The shield held, but the power of the strike was clear. It was only a matter of time before the Elythians would unleash their full wrath. Ethan gritted his teeth. We can't let them catch us off guard. Get us into evasive orbit, Marco. We need to make them chase us. The Pioneer's engines roared to life as Marco steered the ship into a tight orbit around a nearby asteroid field. The ship darted between the floating rocks, its movements erratic and unpredictable. The Elythian cruiser followed, maintaining its pursuit, but now the Pioneer had the advantage of the asteroid field's cover. Inside the ship, the crew worked in perfect unison. Sarah monitored the ship's energy levels, her eyes flicking rapidly from one readout to the next. The shields are holding, Captain, but we can't keep this up for long. We're burning through power fast. Ethan's mind raced. The Pioneer was faster and more agile than the Elythian ships, but it was still outgunned. Every move they made would have to count. We need to give them something they can't ignore. Without warning, the Pioneer performed. A sudden, sharp turn, pulling away from the asteroid field. The Elythian cruiser, caught off guard by the unexpected maneuver, attempted to recalibrate its course, but it was too late. The human warship had positioned itself perfectly. Fire everything. We've got... Ethan shouted. The ship's weapons came online, their energy beams slicing through the vacuum of space toward the Elythian vessel. The blasts struck their target with deadly precision, but it wasn't enough to stop the mighty cruiser. The Elythians retaliated with a barrage of their own, sending shockwaves through the Pioneer's hull. Another violent jolt rattled the crew. Shields down to 60%, Captain, Marco warned, sweat beading on his forehead as he fought to maintain control of the ship. We need to think of something else, or we'll be overwhelmed. For a brief moment, the crew fell silent. They were in the heart of enemy territory, facing an empire that had conquered galaxies. Every move they made was met with immediate retaliation. And yet, they stood firm. We have one last chance, Ethan said, his voice grim but unwavering. We may not have the firepower to take them down, but we can outsmart them. Marco, set course for the planet below. Sarah, get the targeting system ready. I've got a plan. The crew exchanged looks of confusion, but they knew better than to question their captain. They trusted Ethan, and if he had a plan, they would follow it. Do it now, Ethan ordered. As Marco maneuvered the ship toward the planet, the Pioneer's engines screamed under the pressure. The Elythian cruiser followed closely, unable to anticipate the human ship's next move. Just as they neared the atmosphere, Ethan gave the command. Activate the gravity well disruptor. With a sudden burst of energy, the Pioneer released a powerful pulse, disrupting the gravity field of the nearby planet. The effect was immediate. The Elythian ship, which had been tracking them so closely, was now caught in the gravity wave. Their calculations went haywire as their vessel was pulled off course. Unable to keep up with the Pioneer, the crew of the Pioneer held their breath as the Elythian cruiser fought to regain control. For the first time in what felt like an eternity. The gods were losing. Now is our chance, Sarah called out, her voice filled with excitement. The Pioneer darted forward, putting distance between itself and the crippled Elythian ship. As they cleared the gravity well, the Pioneer systems began to stabilize. The crew had done the impossible. They had taken down the gods. First strike, but the battle wasn't over yet. The god's wrath, the Pioneer had barely made it out of the immediate danger, but the tension on board was far from relieved. Ethan stood at the helm, eyes fixed on the readouts, his mind racing. They had successfully evaded the Alethian fleet's first strike, but he knew that was only the beginning. The gods would not let a small human warship challenge them without retaliation. If anything, this was only going to escalate, and the stakes were about to grow even higher. "Captain, the Alethian fleet is regrouping," Sarah reported, her voice steady but filled with concern. "They've broken off from the pursuit for now, but their ships are forming a defensive perimeter. It looks like they're preparing for another attack." Ethan nodded grimly. "I expected this. They're not going to let a single human ship undermine their rule. But we need to stay one step ahead. We can't afford to sit around and wait." Marco, still gripping the pilot controls, turned to Ethan. "I don't like this, Captain. We've been outmaneuvering them, but they have the advantage in firepower. If they catch us in a direct confrontation again, we won't last." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew Marco was right. They couldn't keep dodging attacks forever. But there had to be a way to turn the tide in their favor. The Pioneer drifted in the cold silence of space, just outside the range of the Alethian fleet. The planet they had passed earlier loomed ahead, a vast, desolate world. The gods' ships were now arranged in a tight formation, and from their vantage point, they could see the sleek, intimidating shapes of their vessels on the sensors. Their ships had no visible weaknesses, no clear chinks in their armor. It was a marvel of military engineering, the perfect symbol of their divine power, but it was not invincible. Captain Sarah spoke again, this time more urgently. "I've been analyzing the data from our last encounter. The Alethians are powerful, but their ships rely heavily on a central energy core that powers both their weapons and their shields. If we could disrupt that core, even temporarily, we might have a chance." Ethan's eyes lit up. It was a risky plan, but it was their best shot. "How long would we have before they adapt? Can we hit them where it hurts?" "We would need to pinpoint the exact location of the energy core on each ship," Sarah explained. "Their shield systems are tied directly to their weapons, so any damage to the core would disable both. But getting close enough to deliver a hit, that's the real problem." Marco glanced over at Ethan. "We can't just keep running. If we don't hit them hard enough, we're going to run out of options." Ethan stood still for a moment, thinking, they had only one shot at this. We need to force their hand. If they're so confident in their superiority, they'll get close enough for us to strike. We just need to bait them. As the crew began preparing for their next move, the Alethian fleet closed in, but they weren't moving with the same confidence they had before. Ethan had noticed the subtle shift. Their fleet had taken a more cautious stance, as if they were waiting for something. The gods were no longer the hunters. They were the ones being forced to react. "Captain," Marco said suddenly, his voice sharp, "there's something else, ... We've picked up a signal from one of their ships. It's encrypted, but it's a direct transmission. It looks like they're communicating internally." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Can we decrypt it?" Sarah worked quickly, her fingers flying over the console. A few moments later, the words flashed on the screen. "The humans are testing us. We cannot let them win. Initiate the Divine Force Protocol." Ethan exchanged a knowing glance with Sarah and Marco. The gods were done playing games. The mention of a Divine Force Protocol didn't sit right. The gods were preparing something beyond their usual weapons. "Whatever that is, it doesn't sound good," Marco muttered. Ethan turned to the crew. "We need to move quickly. If the Alethians are preparing something like that, It's going to be big. We can't let them deploy whatever this divine force is. Sarah, Marco, get the weapons ready. I'm going to initiate a decoy maneuver. We're going to force them to follow us into the asteroid field. The Pioneer shot off, quickly accelerating toward the asteroid field they had used earlier to escape. Behind them, the Alethian ships followed, as expected. The gods weren't giving up, but Ethan had a plan to make them chase. He needed to make sure they were drawn into the narrow gaps between the rocks where their massive ships couldn't use their full firepower. Prepare for a series of sharp turns, Ethan commanded, his fingers flying over the controls. We're not giving them an easy shot. Keep them distracted. As the Pioneer weaved and dodged through the asteroid field, the Alethian ships tried to match the human ships' agility. They weren't used to such small, fast targets, and their large guns struggled to lock onto the Pioneer. But as the chase continued, the crew felt the growing pressure they had to make it work. The gods were still confident. They believed they were the predators, and the Pioneer was merely prey. But Ethan wasn't done yet. Marco, now, Ethan shouted. Marco fired the Pioneer's decoy drones. They shot off in every direction, mimicking the ship's movements with advanced jamming technology. The decoys disrupted the Alethian fleet's tracking systems, making it harder for them to target the Pioneer. In the confusion, Ethan ordered the ship to stop abruptly, using the asteroid field to hide behind a massive rock. Formation, now, Sarah. Let's take out the core. Sarah activated the Pioneer's focused energy weapons. The ship's new energy system had been upgraded after their first fight with the Alethians. They now had the perfect shot. With pinpoint precision, she fired at the lead Alethian ship's energy core, just as the fleet passed within range. The powerful blast struck the ship's shield and pierced it, sending shockwaves throughout the Alethian fleet. The lead ship's systems faltered, its shields flickering before collapsing. For the first time, the Alethians' might had been shattered by a single human warship. The Pioneer had forced the gods to bleed, and now the war had truly begun. One down, Sarah said, her voice steady, but there's more coming. Ethan looked out at the debris left in the wake of the attack. The first step is complete. Now, we finish what we started. The gods had been tested, and they were not invincible. The galaxy was about to witness the rise of humanity as the true power in the universe. The divine reckoning, the debris from the destroyed Alethian ship, slowly drifted into the cold void of space, a haunting reminder of humanity's power. The Pioneer had successfully crippled the lead ship, but it was clear that the gods weren't going to stand down. The explosion had sent shockwaves through their fleet, but rather than retreating, they began to form new strategies. The gods were angry, and they were preparing for something far worse. We've done it, Captain. We've sent a message, Sarah said, her fingers working quickly over the console, monitoring the reactions of the rest of the fleet. But they're regrouping, and they're not alone. We've picked up more ships coming in from the dark side of the system. Ethan's mind raced as he processed the information. The gods had to be rattled, but their arrogance would not allow them to back down. They would retaliate, and this time they would be prepared. He could feel the weight of the decision he had made, the gamble that had brought them this far. But now he needed to stay one step ahead. We won't be able to fight them all head-on, Ethan muttered, his fingers tracing the edge of the control panel. They'll overwhelm us if we keep trying to outgun them. But we don't need to outgun them, Marco, the pilot, chimed in. We just need to disrupt their ability to fight back. Ethan turned toward Marco, a spark of understanding lighting in his eyes. Disrupt? How? Sarah interrupted, already working her system. The Alethians rely on their central command structure. If we can get close enough, we can target their communication systems. If we break their coordination, they'll be fighting blindly. We can scatter them. Exactly, Ethan said, feeling the adrenaline surge. Let's put the gods in chaos. It's time to turn the tables. The crew of the Pioneer began implementing the plan. The first step was simple. Get close to the fleets. Command ship and disable its communications. It would be a dangerous maneuver, but it was the only way to shake the Alethians from their arrogance. With their ability to coordinate broken, the Pioneer would have a chance to sow confusion and force the gods into disarray as they neared the enemy formation. The atmosphere aboard the Pioneer grew thick with anticipation. The gods' fleet loomed. In front of them large, intimidating, but unaware of their vulnerability. The lead ships of the Alethian fleet moved in perfect formation, their defensive systems humming with lethal energy. The other ships held back, waiting for orders. It was the perfect moment for humanity to strike. Ethan glanced at Sarah. Ready the disruptor. We only get one shot at this. Sarah gave a small nod, her face serious. All systems online. Disruptor targeting is locked in. Marco, you know what to do, Ethan said. Get us in close. Let's make them think we're just another target. Lead them into the trap. Marco's hands were steady as he piloted the Pioneer through the maze of enemy ships. They were almost invisible in the vastness of space, their stealth systems doing the job flawlessly. But the closer they got, the more the crew felt the weight of the gamble they were about to take. Captain, we're within range, Marco said, his voice steady, but with an underlying tension. Time to make our move. Ethan nodded. Now, Sarah, disrupt their communications. As Sarah activated the disruptor, a pulse of energy shot out from the Pioneer's core, lancing through the dark void like a bolt of lightning. The wave rippled through the Alethian fleet's network, and for the first time in centuries, their communication systems faltered. The effect was immediate. The fleet's once coordinated movements broke apart. Ships began firing erratically, unable to communicate with one another. The gods' precise control over their forces had shattered. Yes, Sarah exclaimed, a grin spreading across her face. Their lines are broken. They can't coordinate. They're blind. Ethan grinned, adrenaline flooding his veins. Now we press. Our advantage, keep them confused, hit their weak spots. The Pioneer weaved in and out of the Alethian fleet, striking at key points, using their own confusion against them. The gods' massive ships were powerful, but their arrogance had made them predictable. The Pioneer's smaller, agile form darted around them, launching focused energy bursts at the ship's propulsion systems, rendering their movements sluggish. And clumsy, the Alethian ships retaliated, but their attacks were uncoordinated. They could no longer bring their full firepower to bear on the Pioneer. It was a dance of chaos, one where humanity was in control, and the gods were desperately trying to regain their grip. But even as the battle raged on, Ethan knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The gods were beginning to regroup, their tactical minds recalibrating. If they didn't strike soon, they would find a way to regain control of the battle. Sarah, Marco, Ethan said, his voice low but determined, it's time. Let's take down their flagship, the flagship of the Alethian fleet, a massive ship gleaming with unearthly power, remained untouched by the initial chaos. But it was vulnerable. now its communication systems down, its fleet in disarray, and its protective shields weakened from the battle. "We're going in," Ethan said, his fingers tightening around the controls. "We'll hit them where it hurt." At the core, the Pioneer hurtled toward the flagship, its weapons firing relentlessly, striking its hull with precise energy blasts. The Elythian ship's shields flickered, struggling to maintain their integrity. Ethan's heart pounded as they closed the distance, the enormous enemy vessel growing larger and larger in the viewscreen. Suddenly, a surge of energy erupted from the Elythian ship's final desperate defense, but it was too late. The Pioneer hit the core with a focused beam of energy, sending a shockwave through the flagship's systems. The lights inside the massive ship flickered and then went dark, its engines sputtering before going silent. The flagship of the gods had fallen. The crew of the Pioneer sat in stunned silence as they watched the massive Elythian flagship drift helplessly in space. For the first time in centuries, the gods were on their knees, and humanity had brought them to that point. "We've done it," Marco whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. "We've actually done it." Ethan stood tall, his gaze fixed on the defeated fleet. "This is just the beginning. The gods may have fallen, but their empire is far from over. But humanity has shown them one thing today: we will not be silenced, and we will not be defeated." As the Pioneer sailed through the debris of the battle, Ethan knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The gods had been challenged, and humanity, against all odds, had won. Asterisk, the shattered illusion, the devastation that followed the destruction of the Elythian flagship rippled through the fleet like a shockwave. Their once perfect formation was shattered beyond repair, and the gods' mighty fleet, once so sure of itself, was now in disarray. What had been an invincible empire had been shaken to its core by a single, defiant human warship. The gods, who once ruled the galaxy with unchallenged authority, now faced their first true defeat in eons. The Pioneer sailed through the wreckage of the enemy fleet, its crew still processing the magnitude of their victory. But even as their hearts pounded with adrenaline, the looming reality of the Elythians' response hung over them like a dark cloud. The gods were not just going to surrender, they would retaliate. It was in their nature, and they wouldn't stop until humanity had been crushed for daring to challenge them. "Captain," Sarah said, her voice tense, as she watched the holographic display showing the remaining Elythian ships. "We've made a serious dent in their fleet, but they're not retreating. They're regrouping, and they've activated something. Something large." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, something large?" Sarah's fingers flew over the controls, zooming in on the new readings. "I'm detecting a massive energy signature. It's coming from the heart of their fleet. It's a weapon, Captain. A weapon like nothing we've ever seen before." Ethan's stomach tightened. The Elythians had just suffered their first real defeat in centuries, and now they were pulling out their ultimate weapon. The message was clear. They would stop at nothing to reclaim their dominance. "We've got no time to waste," Ethan said, his voice firm. "Marco, get us out of here, but keep a safe distance. We need to see what we're dealing with before we make our move." As Marco maneuvered the Pioneer, Sarah continued to track the alien energy signature. The tension in the bridge was thick as the crew waited, uncertain of what would come next. The gods were preparing their final play, and Ethan knew that their victory was only temporary. To challenge a race as old and powerful as the Elythians was to court death, and the gods weren't going to let their illusion of invincibility crumble without a fight. The hologram flickered, and an image appeared, one of the largest ships the crew had ever seen. It was massive, far larger than anything the Pioneer had encountered. Its surface was smooth and sleek, glowing with the same eerie light the gods. Other ships emitted, but what struck Ethan the most was the weapon it was carrying, a massive energy cannon at its center, glowing with a menacing, pulsating light. "That's their final weapon," Sarah said, her voice low with awe. "It looks like a planet-busting weapon. If they fire it at us, there will be nothing left." Ethan's mind raced as he watched the ship power up its weapon. The gods had underestimated humanity's resolve, but they weren't going to make the same mistake twice. This weapon was not just an attack, it was a message. If the Alethians fired it, humanity's resistance would be nothing more than a forgotten blip in galactic history. "We're not backing down," Ethan said, his voice resolute. "If they think this will stop us, they're wrong. Prepare for battle. Everyone, we're going to give them everything we've got." As the Pioneer locked onto the massive ship, Ethan made his decision. They would have to take the fight to the heart of the Alethian fleet. The weapon was their greatest threat, but it was also their greatest weakness. If they could disable it, they would cut the gods' power at its core. The fleet would be powerless, and the gods would lose their grip on the galaxy. "Sarah, can we disable their weapon?" Ethan asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "I don't know if we can disable it directly," she replied, "but we can target its energy core. If we destroy that, the weapon will overload and their ship will be neutralized." Ethan nodded. "Do it. Marco, get us close. We'll need to move quickly before they fire." The Pioneer accelerated toward the giant Alethian ship, weaving through debris and using the debris fields as cover. Every moment felt like an eternity as they closed the distance. The god's flagship was preparing to fire, and time was running out. The Pioneer's weapons powered up, ready to strike. As they neared the massive vessel, Ethan could see the energy weapon charging, its intensity growing. If they didn't act now, the blast would be devastating. The future of humanity hung in the balance. "Target their core, Sarah," Ethan commanded. "Marco, keep us steady." The Pioneer's weapons fired, hitting the central power core of the Alethian ship with pinpoint accuracy. The impact sent a ripple of energy through the vessel, shaking it violently. For a moment, the entire ship seemed to freeze in space, its energy field flickering as if it was struggling to maintain its form. Then, the entire ship erupted in a brilliant flash of light. The energy cannon discharged prematurely, its blast lancing through space but missing the Pioneer by mere meters. The ship's power systems detonated, sending shockwaves through the fleet. The god's flagship began to break apart, its hull disintegrating under the force of its own weapon's explosion. The other Alethian ships, stunned by the loss of their most powerful vessel, scattered in disarray. The god's illusion of control had shattered once again. Ethan and his crew watched in disbelief as the massive ship, once a symbol of the Alethians' unmatched power, fell apart before their eyes. It was a victory, but one that came at a heavy cost. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. "We did it," Sarah said, almost in disbelief. "We've crippled them." "For now," Ethan replied, his gaze still locked on the unfolding destruction. "But the gods won't stop. They'll come for us again. We need to be ready." The shifting tide, the explosion of the Alethian flagship echoed across the stars, its immense power sending ripples through the galaxy. It wasn't just the destruction of a ship, it was a symbol of humanity's resilience, a challenge to the God's reign over the universe. The gods were no longer untouchable. The pioneer had struck a blow that no one, not even the Elythians themselves, could ignore. Yet the victory felt hollow. As the crew watched the shattered remains of the Elythian flagship drift in the black void, they knew they had only won a small battle in a much larger war. The gods would not take this defeat lightly. They would retaliate with everything they had left. Ethan Reed stood at the bridge, his fingers clenched into fists. His heart raced with the thrill of the victory, but his mind was already moving forward, calculating the inevitable consequences of their actions. The gods had underestimated humanity before, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. "Captain," Sarah said, her voice breaking through his thoughts. "The remaining Elythian ships are scattering, but there's something else. The fleet, ... They're calling for reinforcements." Ethan's eyes narrowed. Reinforcements? From where? Sarah's fingers flew over the console, her face becoming more serious with every passing second. "I'm not sure. The transmission is encrypted, but it's coming from a deep region of Elythian space, beyond the known territories. If they're calling for backup from there, ... it could be catastrophic." "Can we trace the source?" Ethan asked, his voice tight. "It's going to be difficult," Sarah replied, "but I'm working on it. We need to act fast. They're assembling something big." Ethan turned to Marco. "Get us to the coordinates." Sarah pulls up. "We don't wait for the gods to regroup. We hit them hard before they can recover." As the Pioneer hurtled through space toward the coordinates Sarah had locked in, the crew remained silent, each of them bracing for what was to come. They had dealt a blow to the Elythians, but the real battle, the true test, was yet to come. The gods weren't just going to lick their wounds and fade away. They had lost face, and that was something they could not allow. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the ship sped toward the unknown, guided only by the encrypted transmission that Sarah had managed to decode. As they drew closer to the source, the eerie silence of space became deafening, broken only by the hum of the Pioneer's engines. Finally, Sarah looked up from her console, her face pale. "Captain ... we're entering uncharted space. This is beyond anything we've seen before. Whatever reinforcements they've called for, they've been waiting here, hidden from us." "How long until we reach the source?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp with urgency. "Less than 10 minutes, Sarah said, her eyes focused. "We're close." As they approached the unknown coordinates, a sense of foreboding settled over the crew. This wasn't just a mission anymore, it was a race against time. The gods had something waiting for them, and they needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The view screen flickered, and in the distance, a massive shape began to take form. Fleet, but not like any the crew had ever seen. It was larger, more powerful, and far more advanced than the ships they had fought before. The sight of it took their breath away. "That's impossible," Marco whispered. The fleet that stretched before them was not just a collection of ships. It was a vast, formidable armada, unlike anything the Pioneer had encountered. And it was moving toward them. "Captain," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly, "they're preparing to attack. This is their full force, and they're not alone. We've triggered something far greater than we expected." Ethan's mind raced. The gods had not only called for reinforcements, they had brought something far worse than a military fleet. This was the last stand, and humanity was standing in the path of an unstoppable force. Before Ethan could issue any orders, the comms system crackled to life with an unexpected voice, one that sent chills down his spine. Humans, ... You have made your mark on the galaxy, but this is where your journey ends. The voice was cold, calculating. It echoed across the bridge, a reminder of the gods' infinite reach. The Alethian fleet had not only prepared for war, they had been watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now they were poised to end it all. "Captain," Marco shouted, his voice frantic. "They're launching something large energy signatures. They're charging their weapons. Get us out of here." Sarah yelled as alarms blared across the ship. "We're too close." Ethan's fingers flew over the controls, but the Pioneer was already surrounded. The gods' new fleet had formed a blockade, trapping them in the heart of this unknown territory. There was no escape. But just as hope seemed to slip away, Ethan's eyes caught a flicker of movement. One of the Alethian ships, larger than the rest, was breaking formation. It was headed directly toward them, moving with purpose. "That ship, ... It's different," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not like the others." Ethan's heart pounded. This was no mere reinforcement, it was the heart of the Alethian Empire itself, and it was coming for them. "Brace for impact," Ethan ordered, but there was no place to run, no place to hide. The gods were coming for humanity, and they would not stop until they had destroyed everything the Pioneer represented. The heart of the storms the Pioneer had nowhere to run. The massive Alethian fleet had fully encircled them, with their greatest weapon at the heart of it all. Ethan could feel the weight of the moment. This was no longer about proving humanity's strength, it was about survival. The ship before them, the true force of the Alethian Empire, loomed like a dark shadow. Its size dwarfed nothing the Pioneer had encountered before. It radiated a malevolent energy that crackled through the cold void of space. It wasn't just a ship, it was the embodiment of the gods' power, and it was coming for them. "Captain, they're preparing to fire." Sarah's voice echoed with urgency. "We need to move now." Ethan clenched his jaw. "No time for evasive maneuvers. We have to fight back. All weapons, full power. Marco, get us close. We'll take out their command ship before they even know what hit them." As the Pioneer systems powered up, the crew braced for what was about to come. The gods weren't playing around anymore. They had deployed their strongest weapon, and if they couldn't stop it now, the entire galaxy would feel the consequences. But what did they really know about this new ship? Its size alone could crush the Pioneer. Its weapons could annihilate entire fleets. But Ethan had an idea. He had a feeling that this was the moment they had been waiting for. The moment where humanity's ingenuity and determination would finally shine through. "Sarah, scan for weak points," Ethan ordered. "I know they're overconfident, but there has to be something. A vulnerability. This ship can't be perfect." Sarah didn't hesitate. Her fingers flew over the console, her eyes scanning the data as it streamed in. "There's a pattern in their energy output. It's unstable near the central core. If we hit it with the right amount of force, it could trigger a catastrophic overload." Ethan's heart raced. "Do we have enough power to make it count?" "We'll find out," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But it's our only shot." The plan was simple: get close, strike the heart of the Alethian ship, and pray that they could escape the aftermath. The Pioneer's weapon systems locked onto the weak spot, and for the first time, the crew felt a wave of hope. Ethan looked around at his cruiser, Marco, and the rest. They had come this far. They had beaten the odds, and now they had to do it again. "Hold on tight," Ethan said, his voice steady but filled with purpose. We finish this now. The pioneers surged forward, cutting through the void like a comet in the night. The immense Elythian flagship, still looming like a predator, aimed its massive guns at them. The weapons systems locked, the beams of destructive energy charging up, but the pioneer wasn't slowing down. They were going straight for the heart of the beast. The tension in the air was unbearable. The countdown began. They had one shot, one chance to take down the Elythian's strongest weapon. Fire. Ethan commanded. The pioneer's weapons fired. In a single, concentrated burst, a brilliant streak of light that sliced through the dark vacuum. The shot hit the core of the Elythian ship directly. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Then, an explosion of light and energy erupted from the flagship's core. The shockwave of force sent ripples through space, rocking the pioneer and blinding the crew. The shockwave was so powerful, it felt as if the very fabric of reality had been torn apart. Status report. Ethan shouted, trying to keep his composure amidst the chaos. Shields are holding, Sarah reported, her voice tight. But the flagship, it's destabilizing. The core is ... collapsing. Can we escape? Marco asked, his voice urgent. We have to, Ethan said, his eyes fixed on the destruction unfolding in front of them. We've done it. The god's greatest weapon is gone. But we need to move before the blast radius reaches us. The Pioneer's engines roared to life as Marco skillfully piloted the ship away from the collapsing Elythian flagship. Behind them, the massive ship began to disintegrate, its power systems imploding in a violent explosion that sent debris scattering in every direction. We're clear, Captain, Marco said, his voice a mix of relief and disbelief. The crew watched, in awe as the Elythian flagship, once a symbol of godlike power, crumbled into nothingness. The shockwaves from the explosion caused the surrounding ships to scatter, their systems in disarray. The gods, once confident in their invulnerability, were now facing the destruction of their most powerful weapon. We've done it, Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly with exhaustion. We've defeated them. Ethan didn't respond immediately. He stared at the space where the flagship had once been. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over. The Elythians still had power, still had forces hidden throughout the galaxy, and they would come for humanity again. But for now, the gods had been humbled. Not yet, Ethan said, his voice resolute. This is just the beginning. The gods may have been shaken, but they're not finished, and neither are we. Humanity will not back down. We've shown them that today.